For this interview, we're going to do sort of a little picture of your life, but in 4 pictures, so it's not that many. Okay, first picture that we've got is of you, a youngin'. Mm-hmm. How old were you?
I think that's 1991, around the time of, Russian coup, breakdown of the Soviet Union and all of that.
And when you look at that picture, to me, you just look like you've been walking along the street with your hoodie on, and they've popped you on.
I'm wearing a Kenzo sweatshirt and a hoodie and a pair of jeans. And no, I mean, look, Newsround was informal, was deliberately informal. You wouldn't dream of wearing a suit and tie.
At such a tender age, interviewing such a major man, were you young and confident, young and cocky, or did you ever feel out your depth?
I started working in television when I was 18, so by the time I'd got to Newsround, I'd already done quite a lot of live TV and current affairs and documentary, and I had that confidence of youth. I was quite happy to tackle anything, so I had no fear about going to interview Gorbachev, even though he was this sort of iconic figure. And I just kind of thought it was all really, really exciting, and I was up for it in a very exciting way.
And obviously, at 21, you were interviewing Gorbachev. I read somewhere that they sent you out to the Bosnian-Croatian wars when you were about 22. Did you realise back then that you were doing really well?
Look, I knew that I was young to be doing what I was doing and that there was nobody else quite like me at that point in time. So it was very exciting to be doing that. And because I was working in television all the way through university. I went to Croatia just before my finals to cover the war. It was an amazingly exciting time. And you'd have to be a bit stupid not to realise that this was quite good.
And you say there was no one quite like you then. Is there anyone quite like you now?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone sort of quite had the same career path, but I mean, I'm sure there's lots of sort of bright young things out there doing lots of exciting things.
Okay, will we move on to picture number 2? Is this one?
That's even younger.
Were you younger?
Yeah.
I saw this. It says 1991.
Right, yeah, no, well, exactly. Well, that was just before I did Newsround, actually. That was when I was doing East, which was an Asian current affairs programme with Shahnaz Pakravan. And it was sort of a BBC Two show that was a magazine programme. I went to Kashmir for them and Sri Lanka. I went to interview the Sri Lankan president. And I was in my first and second year at university.
When you look back at that, for me, obviously...
Very young, very thin, lots of hair.
What you thought you were back then, are you where you are now, what you would have liked to have been? Does that make sense?
I don't think I had a very formed view of where I would be when I was 41. And also, I think when you're 21, 41 seems really old.
Yeah.
So all your ambitions, my ambitions were sort of to do great things by the time I was 30.
So for me, I graduated last year, for example, and in my head, I know in journalism, this is what I'd like to do, this is what I want to do. Did you not have that sense? Were you just sort of going along with it?
No, I always had a sense of what I wanted to do, which was a big current affairs and news show. And sort of my ambition was to cover American elections, and do all that kind of thing. And I had a relatively clear sense of that was sort of my ambition. And actually what happened in my career was that I kind of took, I went off on all sorts of different directions. So Newsround, and the various entertainment shows that I did and all that kind of stuff were all they were just sort of interesting things that came along the way. And then by the time I got to my sort of mid-20s and went to Newsnight, I'd sort of retrimmed my career trajectory back to where I kind of wanted to be. And so I was 28 when I arrived here.
And when you look at that picture, do you think being from an ethnic background, did that matter? Was that important to you at the time? And is it important to you now?
I think it's always been important, but not in a very self-conscious way. I think like most people from an ethnic minority, I grew up being told by my parents that it was tough out there, that you had to be better than everybody else. They tried to prepare us for a tough old world out there. And so I think that's why we sort of came out so up for it and so confident. I was never sort of very self-conscious about, how do I take advantage of this? Am I a victim of racism? Am I being advantaged by the fact that I'm Asian? I mean, to be honest, I think in many ways it's been quite a plus point. I don't think I was ever hired because of it, but I think it certainly didn't do me any harm.
Picture number 3, this is of you, India, that the documentary that you did. Yeah. And this really sort of goes on to the fact that, like you're talking about your career, you've done Newsround, you were at BBC News 24, you've done Newsnight, you've done Channel 4, you've done Unreported World. From someone looking at a distance, it seems like your career path has been paved with gold. Has it been as easy as it looked?
I think I've been pretty lucky, to be honest. Yeah, I've had a pretty charmed career in many ways, and that people have always put opportunities my way. You know, I think in the real world you've got to be reasonable at it for people to keep asking you to do other things. And also, I mean, I think the big thing in my career has been that because I started so young, doing very serious programs, I've had to sort of grow up on Channel 4 News. You know, I came in when I was 28, so obviously I've changed quite a lot in that time. I've done an awful lot of different things. You know, most people in their sort of 20s and 30s are climbing up the pole. They're weaving their way around the industry. And then, you know, they maybe get here doing what I'm doing around now. Well, I've been doing what I've been doing for 13 years. So I've had to find different ways to develop within my job. By doing other things, by doing things like dispatches, Unreported World, you know, a bit of writing, a bit of radio.
I was watching your dispatches in South Africa. No, your Unreported World in South Africa, and then you were interviewing a woman, and she said the words, "I have no hope." And what's it like when you're talking to someone and they're in such a desperate situation? How does that feel?
That was quite striking, that experience in South Africa, because it really was dealing with people who have very little hope of change. And, you know, it's quite depressing and it's quite a stark experience because, you know, they're not starving. They sort of have the basics of life, but their life is awful. I think, to be honest, the way you respond to those things really changes with your age. 20 years ago, I'd have gone there and just kind of thought, well, that's part of, you know, that's just my job, you know. I remember going to, you know, Bosnia and Croatia when I was 21, and I found it quite affecting, but only afterwards when I came and thought about it. I don't think I had a lot of empathy in those days. It was all just kind of wide-eyed wonder, and so I think my approach towards people in those circumstances and my own reactions to it has changed quite a lot over the years.
Okay, move to last picture. This is my graduation class of 2010. We're with Simon Hughes. And as you can see in the photo, there's me, 3 other ethnic minority faces. Looking at that, what advice would you give these kids?
Well, I mean, I would say to them there are loads of opportunities in television at the moment. I mean, it's a very depressing time in many ways because hiring freezes everywhere, job losses everywhere. But actually, if you step back and look at this industry and compare it to what it was when I was starting out 20 years ago, it's much, much bigger. But my attitude was always, there's no reason why I can't reach for the sky. A lot of people you meet along the way will always say, don't try and run before you can walk. You've got to do a bit of this before that.
A lot of people say that to me, so you're always very much like, okay, I'll learn this bit first, but actually you want to be doing that over there.
And my attitude was always, no, I mean, I know how to interview politicians now. I know what to ask them. And I know what the tough questions are, and I know, not rocket science, just telling people what you see. And so I refused to listen to that, basically, and say, no, this is what I want to do. I can do it. The thing I find slightly depressing about that picture is how few ethnic minorities there are, to be honest. How many people are there?
There's 4 of us.
In a class of?
About 22.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a great proportion, is it? You know, I still think the problem seems to be there are a lot of bright, young, middle-class Indian people who want to go into the media, and what we don't have a lot of is African Caribbean, Chinese, you know, other ethnic minority people who get the support within their families to go for it. And I think partly because there's a lot less confidence in those communities than there is amongst a lot of sort of middle-class Indian families.
But it is hard because it costs money. It costs £6,000-7,000 to do a postgraduate, and then you're doing so many work placements where you're not getting paid money, you're doing so many work experiences, so maybe it's an economic.
No, definitely. It's definitely an economic thing. And, you know, there are real issues about, you know, people being exploited basically for work experience and not being paid properly, and how this is sort of a middle-class game. You know, and if your parents can support you while you earn no money, it's a lot easier. But, you know, you've got to struggle. And, you know, if that means doing bar work at night, you kind of got to do whatever it takes in those early years.
So looking at those 4 faces, what would you say to them?
I mean, I'd just say to them, absolutely retain your sense of self-belief, that you can do it. It's perfectly possible. It's perfectly within your grasp. This is an industry that is still keen to recruit bright young things from ethnic minorities. And so if you are one of them, then you know, the world is still your oyster, I would say.
One final quick picture. Instant reaction to you and John having a laugh with your wigs on and sparkly glitter.
It's very important to retain a sense of proportion and humour and not to take yourself too seriously. Is what I would say.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.